right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Authors at Wharton with two of the geniuses behind some company you might have heard of. Really thrilled to have an opportunity to introduce Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg. Dr. Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google from 2001 to 2011, now serves as executive chairman, where he's responsible for all of Google's external relationships, public policy, partnerships, government, thought leadership, advising. He previously held leadership roles at Novell and Sun Microsystems. He did his undergrad at Princeton, master's and PhD in computer science at Berkeley. He serves on the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology and the Prime Minister's Advisory Council in the UK. Boards include the Mayo Clinic and the Khan Academy. He's an active philanthropist with the Schmidt Family Foundation, where his efforts focus on climate change, oceans, education, and technology. He once had a framed picture of Bill Gates supposedly in his office. More on that later, perhaps. Jonathan Rosenberg was offered 2 jobs at Google that he turned down after meeting Larry and Sergey in 2000, finally accepted offer number 3 in 2002. As senior vice president, ran all of products until 2011. He now serves as an advisor to CEO Larry Page. He previously ran products and services at Excite at Home. He also managed the eWorld product line for Apple. He did his undergrad at Claremont McKenna and his MBA at the University of Chicago. I think these 2 executives have done something really extraordinary, which is they've written a management book that is actually worth reading. If you haven't read How Google Works yet, it's all over the bestseller list. They pull back the curtain and explain how they built such an extraordinary company. It's full of wisdom, great stories, also lots of humor. I loved reading it. I hope you will too. Join me in welcoming Eric and Jonathan. So thank you guys again for joining us.
Your introduction is so effective and so intense that this is why you're one of the top faculty members here, right? Right? There's a reason why we chose you.
You've done this before, haven't you?
Yes.
And you wrote a business book that's worth reading as well.
Enough about me. Let's talk about you.
Is he a giver or a taker?
I think he wants to be a giver. This is a reference to the most recent science that Adam has announced, involving that that givers get screwed.
I did just get screwed, didn't I? Thank you. So let's start out. I have to go back to the beginning. Why did the 2 of you join Google? You could have done anything. It was not a well-known company at the time. What drew you there?
Well, in my case, I was running Novell, and I'd merged it with another company. I wanted something different. And I wanted something, Novell was in Utah, and I lived in California. I wanted something that was very small, in a building near my home, that I could get to know everybody.
So I'd run a few companies into the ground. People usually, you were quite charitable. People usually say the now defunct eWorld, which was an allusion to the product that we worked on at Apple. I had then worked for Excite at Home and sort of laid the broadband infrastructure for many of the products that we enjoy today. I think I had realized when I was at Dialog, which was kind of the mother of online information services. Yeah, we had 3 terabytes of data in the bowels of this storage array on Hillview Road, Eric. And what we did was cool in 1990. But it cost like $100 an hour to search information. So I'd actually seen the power of online information. And now that we had the infrastructure with cable modems and fast connectivity, it seemed really clear that Google was going to be successful. And Eric was there.
So Eric was there. He's still there. One of the things that you talk a lot about...
So is Jonathan.
That's true.
We're not dead yet.
You're just getting older.
That's true. I really enjoyed reading your thoughts on interviews, and thought that might be a fun place to start. So I want to give both of you a chance to talk about the extremes. Eric, you had the opportunity of being the first person to hire Sheryl Sandberg at Google, even though you didn't have a job for her. Jonathan, there was some guy named Kevin that you didn't hire that maybe you wish you did. Can you each talk to us about those decisions?
Well, so I'll go first. The good news is there were some smart people who hired this Kevin fellow. They hired him into a program which was called the Associate Product Marketing Manager program. That program was built after the Associate Product Manager program, which Marissa Mayer, who now runs Yahoo, envisioned. And her idea there was, instead of hiring traditional people like me, we go to schools and hire technical people right out of school. So Kevin wanted to move from the Associate Product Marketing Manager program into the Associate Product Manager program. But I had just started to drink the Google Kool-Aid and was sort of seeing people as different labels. So I said, no, Kevin, you're an APMM. You may not be an APM. Kevin left. His last name is Systrom. He founded Instagram.
Go on.
I screwed up. Do you want me to say it again?
Is there anything you learned from that experience about catching the next Kevin Nystrom?
When somebody has as much passion as Kevin did and understands as deeply the technical aspects of where we're going and has a 5-year vision, it doesn't matter what department they're from, and it doesn't matter what the specifications are in the job requirement that you've written. Let them.
And Eric, you avoided that trap. Cheryl and others.
Well, in Cheryl's case, I had met her working for Larry Summers at the Treasury, and she was obviously gifted by virtue of being the only woman, and on a relative basis, much younger than her peer group. And she was obviously a person who would make a difference. She, for various personal reasons, wanted to move to California, and she was competing, talking to us and a couple of other tech companies. And I figured it'd be interesting to see what happened. The problem is we didn't have a job for anyone like Cheryl. So we brought up her resume, and everybody said, like, what would she do? And I said, well, she's obviously a very intelligent person. And so we invented the rule of just hire smart people. And so we made her an offer without having a job attached. We didn't know what the job was going to be. So I put her in, we all shared offices then, and in many cases now, and I put her in with the person who at the time was functioning as the CFO, because I figured that they were like economists, they could talk to each other. And she spent 6 months or so trying to figure out how to finance the company. The company was doing well by that point, and we ultimately didn't need that work. But she learned how our business worked. So this is how these things actually happen. So we had a discussion about, we invented this brand new product called AdWords, and we had no idea how to sell it. She said, well, I know how to build it. And she built the AdWords sales force, which ultimately is worth something like $25 billion of revenue. It just happens that way. And the message that we say over and over in the book is hire generalists with passion and intensity, because in these dynamic environments, you never know quite what you're going to need for. Most companies would never have hired someone with Cheryl's background, and yet look at her achievements at Google and then subsequently at Facebook, and you can see that we were right.
So I wanted to see if we could bring this to life a little bit and ask the two of you to just maybe interview each other for a moment. So, Jonathan.
About what?
Well, let's say Jonathan.
For a job?
Do I get to take control here?
At least for the start, let's say. So you're advising Larry. Larry is looking for an executive chairman. Eric's a candidate. What would you ask him?
Dr. Schmidt, over the last 10 years, take me through the biggest mistakes you made with respect to understanding where technology was going.
Hiring Jonathan?
I've learned this on the tour. You answer the question you want to answer. So what you do now is Henry Kissinger's rule. Henry Kissinger's rule was he would come out to the White House press corps and he'd say, "What questions do you have for my answers?" But now I'm going to go back and take control of the interview, and when you really want to make it harder, you sort of poke and prod people while you ask them a question. So come on, Eric. We're going to hire you as chairman of one of the most valuable companies in the world. Surely you've been thinking for the last 10 years, and there were things that you missed.
Well, I've missed many things. I think the most important thing I did not understand was the rate at which technology would compound and the rate at which these changes happen. So if you look at every error I've made in the last 10 years, it's been because things happen faster than even I thought they would. These platforms are so scalable, right, that everything, it's like boom, all of a sudden it's Instagram, boom, all of a sudden it's Uber. So you have to have a strategy in a business to go and actually do the boom, right? All the normal rules don't work anymore because of the scalable platform that's the internet. In social, which is probably the thing I was the slowest to, if you will, the actual error I made was the was the era of WhatsApp. That I assumed that the namespace of people would be based on email accounts rather than phones. But in hindsight, if you sat there and you thought about it, you'd say everyone's going to have a phone, and people are going to spend all their time texting each other. That namespace, the relationship, is the basis for a huge network platform. How did I do?
I'll tell you at the end when I write up your interview feedback, which will be in great detail. So what is your 5-year vision for Google, and what potential players could significantly disrupt Google in the next 5 years?
Well, as I have previously said in 2011, there are 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of the horsemen. That was just a joke. Who are all driving these network platforms, and each of these network platforms are different. And we've never in our industry had a situation where you have 4. We've always had IBM or Microsoft or so forth. 4 which are well run with different models of the world. And these 4 are Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. So you've got to answer your 5-year question by trying to figure out what you're going to do and then what they're going to do in response to what you're going to do. Right? So if you answer the question, you start by Android and iOS phones, and then cloud computing. That's a pretty good starting answer. And then you got to figure out how to make money.
All right, so Eric.
You're enjoying this.
I am.
I have to wonder, okay, so now you're in the chairman's shoes, right? Jonathan is a candidate to come in and run your products. What do you most want to know from him?
I'm going to give you a hard problem. So, looks to me like, as we previously discussed in our warm-up, the world is going to be mobile phones and cloud computing. How will Google make money over the next 5 years? In your vision, Jonathan, you're the economist.
Well, we did just have an earnings call, and there were lots of questions about cost per click on mobile devices. So we have this grand secular transition from desktop to mobile. In fact, we were talking on the train. People spend 86% of their time on mobile in apps. So the good news is that mobile phones are location aware. Since they're location aware, and since the payment infrastructure is evolving, people will consummate transactions in mobile phones, which they don't today. That's going to make cost per clicks go way up. The constraint and threat that we have is that the vast majority of the activity in mobile is intra-app as opposed to in search. So we're going to have to figure out how to build better apps. We're going to have to figure out how to make HTML5 and the successor of HTML5 even more successful so that people also use their browser. And we're going to have to make search much better on mobile phones.
So I would then follow up with I would then follow up with detailed questions about HTML5 versus mobile apps transition, which is an issue. And I would also try to understand if Jonathan had a vision for how the payment systems would actually work. Right? So a reasonable product marketing candidate in a firm should be able to answer those in great detail. I won't ask you now because you might actually say something important and proprietary in your answer. You might actually invent something.
There's also 2.5 billion new people coming online in the developing world, and being able to bring them into the online medium is going to be a different kind of a dynamic
The most
as well.
interesting thing that we learned on our book tour is that people pick up these phones 1,500 times a week, each one of us.
They sleep with them as well.
Next to the bed. Unless you sleep with yours in the bed. You sleep with this in your bed?
No, it's next to the bed.
97% of the people sleep with their phones next to them in bed, and 95% of those have the phones on.
I'm still here, guys, by the way. So, hey.
Look, it was your idea.
Now, so if we can sort of deconstruct the interview, you say in the book that hiring is probably the most important decision that you make, and that's been a big priority at Google. You say you want to hire people who are not just competent, but interesting. What are you looking for, and how would you actually vet these kinds of answers?
So Eric said briefly, we hire generalists, not specialists, again, because the world is changing so quickly. We interview for passion, and we have something that we actually call in the book the airport test, which is if I were stuck in LAX airport with this person for 6 hours,
This is a very tough test.
would I learn something? I actually learned that if I'm stuck with Eric for 3 weeks on a book tour, I keep learning things. So that's good. That's a tougher test. But I find that when you get people talking about something that they're passionate about, a couple things happen. They let their guard down, right? The interview becomes easier. You also find what you want to push for is what is the limit of their knowledge, right? Do they just know enough to prepare for the interview, or do they actually know, do they actually have a lot of depth on the subject? So that's what I look for.
So for example, when I asked him the questions about strategy, he gave the generic marketing answers with the verve and the energy that Jonathan has. And I know he actually knows the technically correct answers, but if I didn't know that, I would have pushed. And I'd try to say, how would you solve this problem, right? How would you solve this problem? So a simple one is, tell me how the new Apple payment system is going to change the way banking works, right? Reasonable question to a VP of candidate thing. But you're looking for somebody who is not just reading the articles in the newspaper. They have real insight. Now, when I first joined Google, we had a rule that you had to do something odd. So we had a person who's a rocket scientist, and they didn't want to do rockets anymore. We had a person who was a physician who didn't want to be a physician anymore.
A neurosurgeon.
We had a neurosurgeon. We had a physicist. And so everybody was sort of reformed, right? And one of the ideas, for example, when we were recruiting is we always like to recruit people who were professional athletes because they had done something that was really hard, right? And they had pursued it with great passion, right? And many of the sales teams had these sorts of people who were skilled. People who they weren't just pure academic stars. They had grit, as you would say today, or persistence. So it's more than just IQ. It's insight, persistence, and drive. And indeed, in the book, we invented this term called the smart creative, which is really about, what we say is it's about some kind of technical knowledge, interest in applying that to business, and then curiosity. So you're looking for that. If you got all that, you've got a pretty good candidate. And the error that people make is they hire to the job, not the person. I need a Java programmer. I need a person with IT experience. I need a person who's been a teacher before. I've been a person in HR. I've been a person who's a salesperson, right? Rather than...
So you do this, and you end up attracting some fairly unusual candidates, some of whom are googly. And some need actually a user manual in order for other people to understand how to work with them. Talk to us about that, and then if you were going to write a user manual for working with Eric and working with Jonathan, what would go in it?
So the user manual that we refer to in the book is actually Urs, who runs our infrastructure department. He's Swiss, German, and...
So you could imagine the stereotype.
And so he starts this document that basically says, if I've offended you, it probably wasn't on purpose. And it sort of then goes through, how to interpret him. So I think one important characteristic of a manager is people need to understand their user manual. Mine is pretty simple, and we talk about it in the communications chapter. I am great at communicating internally. That was about the only thing I was great at that applied at Google. Most of the other things that I wanted to do, as we talk about in the book, a lot of the MBA wisdom that I had in terms of how to do structured product planning, the patient pretty much rejected the Jonathan donor tissue. But I was, as we say in the book, a very effective router, and everything about my management style was about maximizing the rate of communication within teams and across teams. And I was always very, very aggressive about that, and I was also aggressive about just forcing not only sharing of information, but starting of conversations. Starting conversations between Team X and Team Y, and really trying to drive innovation across the teams.
In my case, I was primarily, during that period, focused on operational matters, literally building the corporation, and sort of studied spin rate in bicycles. And if you talk to the bicycle riders that are really good, it's all about constant spin rate. And it sort of just keep spinning as fast as you can, same speed, and they know their spin rates. So management can be the same thing. So my position was, let's make decisions as quickly as we can, and let's have a process, and let's do it systematically, and we'll scale as fast as we can, right? And it worked.
And if I were a Korean pop star, how would I adjust that user manual?
If you were, well, what I've learned about the music and fashion industry is they don't think the same way Jonathan and I do.
Well, actually, you would dance. It wasn't just, Eric wasn't alone. He was a three-headed beast, right? He was a management triumvirate. So the user manual was really that you could go to any of the managers, any of Eric, Larry, or Sergey, and they would give you an answer. And then they would meet at the end of every day. And I think what he did with our famous Korean pop star was particularly CEO-like. When you're the CEO, you don't dance like no one's watching. You know everyone is watching, so you just have to dance. What did he do?
You learn the horse
He
dance.
danced. You know that little thing.
So I have to say, I'm curious as you think about Google's broader role in the world in public policy. You talk in the book about the really tough decision about China and saying we're going to shut down basically our local site. We're facing some possibly similar issues with Russia today. How are you thinking about that, and what are you forecasting?
Well, what I've learned about countries is, when we started, I assumed that we could have blanket policies. We had a very US-centric view. Then we said, well, and I've obviously had a lot of international experience, we'll do things in the US, and we'll have some international answer. What I've since learned is that each country and each situation is different. And they're different for many reasons, both legally and culturally and so forth. And you have to have rules that apply to the country. In the case of China, as we discussed in the book, we ultimately decided to leave China roughly January 2010, and because we didn't like the censorship. There are something like 45 countries that have various content restrictions that are pretty offensive. Many of these are things which you all might agree to, but in fact are used for other purposes, typically to suppress political speech. So political speech the freedom of political speech is very important, right, from our perspective. So in Russia's case, things seem to be getting worse. It's funny that the KGB was in charge of the internet, but they weren't very focused on it. And so the Russian internet until recently was incredibly open. But recently they've put in some laws which appear to be targeted first at Twitter, which essentially criminalize much of the kind of speech that others would think of as political speech. And they have a series of rules which are that, and also having to have servers in the country. Now, these laws are getting written by politicians who don't understand that Google now encrypts everything because of the NSA attacks. So if you put the servers in the country, you can have the servers, but you still have encrypted data. And we're trying to convince them of that.
So another big topic that's sort of on the horizon for Google is this concept of a balloon that can't pop, and using balloons to power internet. What's your stance on that?
Well, I thought it was absolutely crazy. So this is a project called Project Loon, and basically what we're doing is we are launching balloons that then provide 3G connectivity from up in the atmosphere to areas that aren't presently connected. It sounded insane. What's fascinating is not only have they figured out the physics of the balloons, but they figured out that it's not nearly as hard to get the balloons in the locations that you need to get them to by sort of understanding the winds and the atmosphere and the various levels. I mean, a balloon seems to me like this thing you don't navigate. You remember the little red balloon store? You let it go and it goes.
But the other key breakthrough was that the balloon speaks to normal mobile phones. And up until this development, people always had to have specialized receivers. But in the developing world, people have secondhand phones, 3G phones, older phones. So that was, I think, the key, the really, really key insight, is we could do that.
And as you think about self-driving cars, another big development, what do you expect to be on the horizon? When is that actually going to be a reality? And how is it going to change the way that we live?
Well, a lot will depend on whether the regulators will allow these cars on the roads. Every day I get in a car and I think, isn't it shocking that we allow humans to drive these things? Wouldn't it be better if a computer were driving these things? And so, imagine 100 years ago. So imagine today we'd all arrived by horse, and then one of our students here had invented the car and had driven the car and parked it in front of the theater. How long do you think before that car would be banned, right? Some number of minutes, right? So it's remarkable that humans are allowed to drive these 2-ton machines at such dangerous speeds. And I think it's going to be, the technology clearly works. So I think it's a question of maybe a decade. But that's largely, in my view, regulatory. Last week, Tesla announced the next generation of interesting drivability features, including self-parking and some other things. So I think our initiative is clearly helping move the industry along.
So that was when, but you asked how it would change your life. There will be people who don't die.
That would be an example of
important.
not changing your life.
The other thing I think we'll see is you won't own a car. You'll own a share in a fleet. And the fleet can be any kind of car. So for a different rate, you could own a fleet of sedans, but when you want a sports car, you could ask for the sports car, and it would drive itself to you, and it could arrive with the top down, and you could get in.
But there's a core question about cars, and particularly sports cars. What is the legal liability when the car exceeds the speed limit? Why are you getting a sports car if it's not to exceed the speed limit, Jonathan?
Because they handle really well going around turns.
Yeah, right.
Because I look cool in a sports car.
At 65 miles an hour on a 65-mile-an-hour highway. I can just see this.
So I enjoyed in the book reading about Steve Jobs and some of your interactions with him. What did you learn from interacting with him, and what can we all take away from that?
Well, Steve is one of those sort of great, Einsteinian level figures in our history, and he'll be remembered for hundreds of years, I think. And his business story has been well told. But the sheer accomplishment of founding the company, having it go up, having it fall, rejoining the company, and rebuilding it, that's what phenomenal founders do. And that's why founders are different from hired guns, right? Sort of professionals like Jonathan and me. Founders they have a unique ability to drive and see change. And when I first met Steve, he was talking about this mobile phone thing. And I said, phones are fine, people are using them and so forth. But remember, it was his passion to drive the company into a revenue model where there was no revenue compared to the Mac, right? But he was so sure he did it anyway. And he's just a remarkable person, and we miss him a great deal.
So let's open it up for some questions from the audience. We have microphone stands. We're going to have people line up, and we'll go kind of our left to our right, unless people show up earlier on the other side.
Here we go.
Ryan, I think you're up.
Hey guys, so you guys are obviously really accomplished, so why write a book?
Adam, why'd you write the book? Because it's publish or perish in your world.
I think he already had tenure. We had, so in our case, I think somewhere along the line it became clear that the kind of stuff we were talking about was sort of in our own little bubble, and an awful lot of people were not practicing it, and it all seemed quite obvious to us.
Well, we actually got help. So we started, and the book was intended for the target audience of the next Larry and Sergey, the next entrepreneur in a garage. And I appreciate the note that we're highly accomplished, but it actually took our publisher to point out to us that there weren't that many Larry and Sergeys in a garage, and most of them didn't have enough money or time to read a management book. So we should expand the audience of the book to managers in existing companies who want to make sure that they aren't disrupted by the next
I should say, by the way, I wanted Jonathan to write the book, and I would take the credit. But I wanted Jonathan to write a hardcore management book with all the history and so forth. And Jonathan said people don't read those books. What they do is they read narrative.
Yeah, so originally what Eric really wanted, I felt like he wanted me to be like the next Michael Porter or Clay Christensen or Peter Drucker, and I was like, I don't know, I sort of got my way, I made it through college sort of paraphrasing those guys and putting footnotes next to them. So I decided that that was going to end tragically and wouldn't work. So what we really focused on was structuring the book around the evolution of an entrepreneur, starting with the things that matter at the beginning, culture, then moving on to strategy and hiring and decision making. And to do it with stories as opposed to management theories. So that's why it's actually fun to get assigned.
But
read.
you're omitting the punchline. You, as typical, you got a, you wrote a talk internally.
Oh, so, well, the fun part was, I really wrote the book because I was bored with Eric. There, boom. I would get bored in Eric's staff meetings, and so to move things along,
How is that possible?
I would write, because the action items weren't all mine. You and Larry and Sergey and everybody else were arguing. So I would write down the management-isms that we had. You know, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer. Bank goodwill for a rainy day. And when we would come up with one of these things, I would write it down, and then to move the conversation along, I would say, Rule 12, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer. The employees are concerned. We should have a meeting about this, because it would move things along faster. So in 2009, we had a big leadership meeting, and the guy who ran sales for us said, well, Jonathan, you've been writing these rules down all the time. You should give a talk to all the new Google managers on how we manage and lead at Google. And that was the actual real genesis of the book.
And the title was?
Notes for the bestseller I'll never publish.
Hello, how you doing? Well, it's loud. So I'm a YouTube comedian, and I really want to have a career in the entertainment industry. Clearly, YouTube has changed that a lot. So could you guys kind of explain how the acquisition of YouTube came to be, and how you kind of see its role in the entertainment industry now, and how it's going to continue to affect the entertainment industry?
I'll let you answer the latter. So we had done something called Google Video, and one of our board members was at Sequoia, and Sequoia had invested a little bit after we started Google Video in these two young men who did YouTube. And I didn't think too much of it. I looked at the site and so forth. And then we were watching growth rates, and it was growing much faster than we were. And so David Drummond, who's our sort of smart guy doing legal and deals, you know, I said, why don't you go visit them? So we went to visit them, and he came back and said, they're phenomenal, they're doing really well. So he kept in touch. So one day he comes in and he says, I think we should buy them. And I sort of eyeballed it, and I said, I think we should pay less than $500 million for them. And he said, no. And I said, well, how much do they want? He said, well, it'll cost at least $700 million. And I said, okay. Do they have any revenue? No. Okay. These numbers were big at the time. Just bear with me. These were big numbers now, too, in my view. So eventually, we come back, and David says, we have to deal with this now. Well, how much are they going to cost? Oh, 1.1 or something. And I said, well, I'm willing to pay 800 or 900. And he said, you're going to lose this. So he said, look, we have to have a meeting. So we arranged for a meeting, and we wanted to have a meeting in a place where no one would see us. So we met in Denny's. Because it was the one place we thought of that no one we'd never been to. And therefore, none of our friends would be there either. So we met, and these guys were brilliant and so forth, and we then made them an offer, which turned out to be $1.65 billion. And we had to do this in a weekend. So we met with them on a Sunday, and conveniently the board meeting was, I think, the following Tuesday. So we had them show up in the board and explain what they did, and then we said, the board, you have to buy them. So that's how it really worked. And they didn't have any revenue, and their servers were about to die, and they were about to be sued to death. So we got sued to death, and we scaled their servers very quickly. And so the partnership between Google and YouTube really, really worked very well. I don't know the numbers, but YouTube is a massive, massive level of success. The funny story about this is that they told me later that they liked the Denny's idea so much that the next day they met with the other guys trying to buy them in Denny's.
So if you really want to be a successful comedian, I guess my advice would be to be funny.
Jonathan, can't you do any better than that?
The other thing you can do is you can have a much more specialized audience. So at work, all of my jokes are funny because the people who I pay to work for me know that if they laugh, they'll get raises. But we're getting much better at monetizing YouTube. We've come up with much more innovative ad formats. The TrueView format is certainly a pretty significant one. I guess what I think you're going to see is you're going to see a distribution where content is created with two tails. There's going to be the traditional hit-driven mentality, which I think is going to be the very largest, most successful things that are much, much higher budget. And then until the monetization gets better, the more specialized things are going to have to be are still going to have to be relatively low budget. And I think it's recreating those specialized things for more and more audiences at budgets that can actually be supported by whatever the revenue generation capabilities are of the day that is going to be the critical thing to match. So first you have to gauge to what types of people are you funny.
I think the most important thing is that celebrity is about influence, virality, all the stuff you know. And so one way to think about what YouTube has done is imagine there's 100 comedians. Well, one of those comedians is going to break out. And the people who are looking for comedians, right, will be able to measure this. That's never been possible before. And so what we do internally is when we see these breakouts, we try to work with those people, try to help them, try to get them some money or support or partnerships. And that seems to be working. It's a different kind of studio model because it's based on initially tonnage, but then the user speaks, in this case, the viewer or the fan, and then we can help.
Let's go back to the other side. Hey, Nicole.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question is, as a student, I was particularly intrigued by the part of the book where you explain the influence of campuses on the design of Google's office. The academic and athletic facilities, and how everyone is still working incredibly hard all the time that has these outlets. So I was wondering if you thought, what you think is one aspect of Google that universities could try to emulate to enhance the feel and the productivity of colleges?
Free food. But the funny thing about the free food is that when I first saw this, I thought, we're giving these people free food? It turns out that snacks are very expensive. But having cooked food, cooked by professional cooks and bought in bulk and so forth, and having everybody actually sit and eat together in a cafeteria, and having high quality, healthy food is better in every dimension. It's inexpensive, it's good for collaboration, right, in many, many, many ways. Right, avoid the snacks. In fact, one of the debates that Jonathan and I would have at length were the micro kitchens, which are full of the snacks. And we would give those debates numbers. This is the 9th time we've had this debate. Eventually, we decided to turn off most of the micro kitchens because everybody was getting heavy. Right. Well, free food from cooked professionals.
It was actually more clever than that. We did a couple of things to make sure that people ate better. We didn't completely turn off the micro kitchens because we've learned once you give, you can't take away. So what we did was we moved the things that were really bad for you into places that were harder to get to, so that people couldn't.
They would actually require that you bend over to get this.
So the other thing that we did in the cafeterias was we created a little pony wall so that you couldn't see dessert when you were actually getting the food that was better for you. So if you went around the pony wall, it was still there.
That's
but you
why
had
the
to
pony
be
wall was
motivated
there.
to get there. That's why the pony wall was. That was my idea.
Good. Okay.
Good afternoon. So about a year ago, I installed Adblock Plus on Chrome and on my Android phone. And for the last year, I've seen maybe a total of half a dozen ads. And I know that my value as a internet user has plummeted probably 99% in terms of revenue that Google gets from me. And what do you say about the idea of this suddenly taking off and going viral? Because it is growing, but all it could take is just suddenly.
But let's ask the hypothetical. Had you not installed an ad blocker, would you have clicked on any of the ads? Since you obviously don't like them, that's why you're blocking them.
See, I didn't really hate the ads. They're honestly, when there's too many of them, it clutters the page. I didn't do it because I have any opposition morally to ads.
Good.
Sure, there's a danger that people will choose to install software that prevents them from seeing ads. I think it's a vestige of ads being thought of as something that aren't useful. And one of the things that we've really been focused from the start was figuring out how do we make the ads useful. So I guess the question that I would ask you is, what is there that might have otherwise changed your life that you might have bought if you'd been seeing those ads and clicked on one of them?
That's known as the attack him with the opportunity cost question.
Correct. And what would it have? Why would it have been bad for you to see those ads? I know you'd have to think about it.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you for speaking with us. My question is about the role of activism, and I was wondering specifically, in light of to what extent do you see the role of companies like the responsibility of a company like Google, or companies in other sectors that are coming into new environments? To what extent do you see that their responsibility to create and shape the environment through their product exclusively, or through crafting the world around their product? And I'm thinking in terms of the way companies like Google and Tesla seek to lobby and help to change regulations for their products to come on market, as opposed to companies like Uber and Airbnb, who enter markets where their initial product is arguably illegal, and then seek to change the status quo based on.
Well, but I understand that there's a subtle distinction that you're pointing out, but the principle unifies all of them, which is the founders and the leadership and the people in the company see that their products make people's lives better, right? And so if you take that position, then everything is an obstacle. But if you're convinced that your product just makes people healthier, wealthier, happier, better entertainment, and so forth, then go for it, right? And you do, because there are incumbencies that threaten that. People don't like discontinuous change. You threaten the economics of an older line business, et cetera, et cetera. Of course you're going to have criticism or worse. And indeed, traditional industries will often hire lobbyists or write regulations which explicitly exclude new entrants. And my view, as a matter of politics, is that we would solve a lot of problems in America if we had more economic growth. And the best way to get more economic growth is to have more entrepreneurs of all kinds, right, trying to create these fast-going global companies in all fields, right? And I think we should encourage it.
Hi, thank you both for being here. My question for you all is coming from this audience as students. So you said Google hires generalists, not specialists, and I imagine that applies to your out-of-college hires as well. So what would you all say to us would be the top 2 or 3 qualities that would be most valuable for us to develop, whether we want to work at Google or just for the economy as a whole, and how to develop them?
Yeah. So certainly just general cognitive ability. Study hard. Study hard in every class, and you can learn something in every class. We talked about passion. Obviously, at Google, we're very focused on hiring computer scientists and engineers. But I think the other thing that I would say is my strongest advice for students today would be there's so much more data available today that you should study statistics.
Right.
Become a data scientist.
Right.
Think about it the way Bill Gates thought about getting into the computer industry when he was young. What he said was, the cost of computing is coming down exponentially. So I'm going to write software, right? Your economics professor would say the complementary scarce resource was the software when the computing was becoming cheap. So the same thing is true now. Data is becoming cheap and ubiquitous, so the person who can analyze that data is going to be in high demand.
Hi, thank you very much for being with us this evening. I was recently reading the Wall Street Journal, and there was an article about Google and how it's entering the medical realm by seeking to define a healthy human being through their baseline project at Google X. And that's something quite unusually fascinating for Google to venture out into the medical area. Could you talk more about what you're expecting with that, where that project's going?
Some of that was speculation, so maybe it's better if I talk about something we've already done. We have a small team in Google X that had been working on putting a computer in a contact lens. And they managed to put this computer in the contact lens with a small battery, and it measures the markers for your insulin state. So if you're diabetic, right, it gives you a color which indicates where you are in your, whether you need to change your insulin medicine and that sort of thing. This is a life changer for the hundreds of millions of people in the world who are affected by this. So we invented this thing. We started like, oh my God, right? What are we going to do with this? Because we're not in that regulated business, and obviously it's trials and all of that. So we licensed it, and the value of that license agreement is many, many, many times the development cost and the salaries and so forth of those people. But we did it because of the possible impact. So if we can stage those kinds of things into healthcare, we're going to do really well. But we do it because we want to make people's lives better.
Hey, thanks for coming in. Given you're both preeminent minds in technology, and for myself and all the other entrepreneurs in the room, I couldn't help but ask, what are some of the trends in technology that you're seeing people are not talking about that they really should be talking about? So I think like mobile, the sharing economy are kind of like foregone conclusions in technology, like they're big, they're out there. Like, what are some things that people are not talking about that they
It's
should
interesting that 3 years ago, had we been here and we'd been talking about the sharing economy, everybody would say, like, what are you talking about? And yet, had you done that, right, you would have joined, Uber or Lyft or those kinds of companies, and you would be in the middle of this extraordinary growth. So these things happen, and they happen pretty quickly. And I think, could you have seen the sharing economy 3 years ago? I think you could have, if you'd sat down and sort of looked at all the principles. What's going to happen next on this platform? I missed it, right? But others didn't. Travis didn't. And so my own view is that the biggest things going forward will be from all of the things that are occurring in biology and genetics. And that sort of the sort of combination of mobile phone, transdermal patches, human monitoring, right, and putting those into sort of new ways of making people's lives healthier is probably the biggest next one.
Yeah, I guess I think people don't sort of pull back and analyze these things in terms of the basic economics behind them. And if you go back to the sharing economy or even some of the other giants of the internet age, eBay or Google, everything is actually about this transition to information costs and transaction costs going to zero and a much more frictionless economic environment. And if you think about it, what was eBay, right? There's somebody in your garage, something in your garage that you'd be willing to sell to somebody else that they don't know about for less money than they're willing to pay, right? And as soon as you put those combinations and permutations of people together, you spawn an enormous amount of commerce. And most of the successful companies in the internet space figured that out. Google figured that out with users and advertisers. Everything in this sharing economy understands that any asset that goes unused for any period of time has a value associated with it that can be harnessed. The other big one, Eric talked a little bit about pharmaceuticals. People aren't talking as much about the implications of longitudinal tracking of health information. We have these sort of limited steps with tracking tracking how many steps you take in a day and that sort of thing. But we're going to be able to track all sorts of things longitudinally and build a much stronger profile of
Jonathan, you have an example where there's an app being developed which in theory could be prescribed by your kid's psychiatrist that could notice that the teenager's gotten depressed, right, and call the psychiatrist. Obviously it has to be HIPAA compliant and opt in and all of that. So these could have serious positive benefits.
It's a pleasure to meet you today. I have 2 questions for you. What size t-shirts do you wear?
I'm a large.
I'm a large also.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. Was there a second question?
So we're members of Wharton Startup. We want to welcome you to our
You have to read
stomping grounds.
You have to read it, Eric, before you put it
It's
on.
called Rehab Messenger.
Okay.
So we built a messaging app. Among many things.
Are we doing a good job of advertising your social network yet?
There is a half decent question coming.
Okay, please continue.
Among many things, we allow users to recall their messages if they regret sending it ever. And we've all made that mistake. So with one click of a button, you can recall images, text, anything that you've sent in error. My second question is,
By the way, this is what it takes to be an entrepreneur. We celebrate this, right? He's got a product to sell, and we are going to know about it. That's great.
That was actually, what statement do you have when I'm supposed to ask a question? But that's good.
so, but our ultimate goal is to transmit emotion in its purest form and be able to monitor your counterpart's emotional change while you're communicating with them. But we can't do that quite yet just with software. So we need wearable devices and hardware to be as active a member in this playground and ecosystem. And I just wanted to ask you, what can platform providers such as Google do to encourage that trend to take shape faster?
Well, I think the most powerful thing you can do is explain your idea so that the hardware manufacturers can understand how the things that they build will manifest themselves in a way that will change lives. I mean, imagine taking what you just suggested there with the comedian, right? He could test his jokes on an audience. I don't know what more you would need than their permission and the camera to be active, to be able to do pilot tests to see what jokes actually work. So I think the most effective thing you can do there is just evangelize this vision and articulate what types of things you would want to monitor in a human other than their smiling. I guess maybe it's audible, whether they're laughing.
People love to take pictures of themselves. So I would just figure out some way to have people constantly being take pictures of themselves so that you can analyze it.
As a follow-up on that, for those who didn't have the courage or audacity to pitch their product today, how does something get on your radar?
Through speeches like this.
Number one way it gets on my radar is through a demo. When people send me a plan, I don't read it. But when people send me something very short that's very clearly passionate and say, just let me have 5 minutes of your time and I'll show you a demo, then you know that they're actually somewhere, and you know they have technical talent. Because if all they have is a team of business people, they don't have a demo.
So there are two ways. For me, the easiest answer is you need to read a lot of media, right? And it becomes fairly clear when things pop out. But I also, since I have lots of friends all over the world, because I travel and do the speeches, I ask people to let me see what they're doing on their phones, which inevitably is exciting. And you'll be amazed how quickly you'll pick up the latest apps or so forth. It's a very efficient market now.
Hey, thank you for being here. I had a question. With such a broad range of products and it's growing all the time, I was just wondering, one, how you think about managing that, and two, do you ever worry about the company becoming overextended?
No.
Thank you.
When we built the company, we built it for systematic innovation. And so there's a sort of set of principles, right? You have to have a strategic vision. We talk about these in the book. You have to have a set of strategic vision. You have to have a 5-year plan, all that kind of stuff. Everybody kind of has to get it to understand that. And then you need to let people do their thing. And you have to have strong enough people in the middle management who actually have judgment, right, that they can actually push these things through. And that allows you to scale very, very quickly. And it helps to have brilliant founders and a few other things like that.
Thanks a lot.
Great. It's so great to be here with you today. I just have a question for you about your vision for the future of mobile technology, of mobile interfaces and applications. And to frame my question, as we see products like Google Now and arguably Siri transcend the need for certain applications, what will the mobile interface look like in the next few years?
Well, I can tell you what the teams now are saying to us. They're saying that voice is more and more important. Google continues to win all of the voice recognition awards against Siri and others, by the way. So we have, so we're clear. And the way voice recognition works, by the way, is it's not done on your phone. It's done on supercomputers in the back, right? So those supercomputers just get better and better because of machine learning and other techniques that we've invented. So the first part is voice, and the second is the Google Now model, we think is much more fundamental than others. We think that Google Now, which surfaces things, a way of thinking of it as suggest, rather than ask, we suggest, that model is going to get better and better. What the UI will look like, will they be cards or something else? I think that's more debatable. But the core two patterns are more voice usage and more surfacing of content that's interesting to you.
Hi. So Google is known for internal cultivation of ideas. We talked about the contact lenses for diabetes, and one thing it's also increasingly being known for, and the other three horsemen as well, are the large acquisitions of companies with very little revenue. I'm just wondering how you think about acquisition versus internal cultivation and how that's changed over time.
Well, so first place, the company buys, a company a week, 2 companies a week, but they're all small. And the typical way this works is the venture industry funds 5 companies that do X for some X. And one of them turns out to be better than the others. How much should you be willing to pay for the better one than the others? Now, any normal business analysis just say, well, don't buy the first one, buy the third or fourth, because it's a factor of 3 cheaper or 4 cheaper or something like that. But that misses the point. Sergey would always play this joke on me, and he'd say, what is our biggest expense, Eric? And I'd say, I do my calculation, I'd say, taxes. And he'd say, no, opportunity cost. That the most important thing to do is to get a head up on your competitors and your innovation cycle. You need these teams, and so what's nice about the venture guys is they've run the experiment, and this team is in fact better than the others. You should be willing to pay a premium, and a significant premium, for that first one. That's the way we think about it.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking here today. So recently there's been a lot of people who say that technology has brought many harmful effects to society today, like negative health effects, and also that it makes people more lonely by making us less social. As leaders in this technology industry, how do you have any thoughts about this?
They're wrong.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go back, just go back 300 years, right? I mean, we said these same things with the Industrial Revolution. And 400 years ago, people lived in abject poverty. They didn't have access to penicillin. They were largely farming and creating food. And today, I can travel here from New York. I just came from London. I can have raspberries in December.
You don't need to give your whole
Everything. Well, so everything is better. I mean, I wonder who's like the bonehead who said they don't make them like they used to. What?
By the way, just imagine
name the product. What was the product?
Jonathan, I'm going to give you the answer.
Please, he's like Google now.
If you want to go back in time, just think dentistry. There was this whole argument 15 years ago that we were all going to be bowling alone, we were all going to be sitting on our couches, watching television, we'd have no friends, we'd all be depressed. Do you know what that person is doing? Text, 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 picture of themselves. Text, 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 picture of their food. Text, 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 picture of Jonathan. They are not alone. We have a problem of over-communication and over-sharing. I think the argument is just wrong. I couldn't be clearer. I think the data supports my position.
Let's take one more question over here, Kenny.
Thank you very much, Adam. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'll phrase this one really quickly. I was really intrigued by your recent hire, well, not so much recent anymore, but hires of Regina Dugan from the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency and Arun Majumdar from Advanced Research for Energy. So I wonder if you could elucidate a little bit what you're thinking on in the energy space in particular, where you think that might be going, and your play there.
Well, Arun is doing research on new kinds of energy management, which is something he did at Stanford, and we're not in a position to talk about that. You worked very closely with Regina.
So I actually helped hire Regina. We hired her into Motorola, and she has transferred now into the Chrome and Android team. She'd been working on a lot of the customization. Her team was responsible for the Moto Maker customization efforts and some of the cool stories, the storytelling capabilities that you see on Motorola devices. I'm not sure what she's doing that's energy related, but she's taken that 2-year DARPA model that she had where people come in for 2 years and seems to have had a lot of success getting brilliant people. And she has an approach to innovation. If you run a search on her paper, there's a Harvard Business Review paper that she wrote. But by bringing people in for 2 years, they have a finite amount of time to assemble their team. They have a finite amount of time to get something done. And they're not rated or managed aggressively during that period. They just have to finish something within 2 years, and then she kicks them out. So it's a very interesting model of innovation that's relatively unique, and she's brought that into Google. She had some great success with it at Motorola.
Can we do 3 more things? Jonathan, will you just tell them about this phone?
Okay. Well, so this is the new Nexus 6.
Okay.
And you'll notice that it's really, really, am I allowed to show it yet? I think I checked it.
We announced it.
It's a little late. So
we already announced it.
So it's the big phone that you didn't know you need. People think about, when you ask consumers what kind of a phone they want, they always say smaller, because their brain was sort of trained by that StarTech device. And so you think, okay, I want this phone to be smaller. But what is this? This is a supercomputer in your pocket connected to via a high-speed network to the cloud. And if you carry around a screen, and if you're my age and you can barely read small screens, you can actually do a lot of work. Eric brought his computer on the train. All I brought was my phone, and it worked out splendidly.
Can we get 3? Let's do 3 and 3 questions because we've run out of time. The two of you, and then the first person. If the 3 of you could just ask your questions, or just you, and then we'll do them as fast as we can. Go ahead.
Should I go? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to know your vision on how entrepreneurs should think in terms of sustainable energy and how that's going to look within 10 years from now. And also another question is, I'm starting up a company right now, but I'm Egyptian, and that has witnessed a few problems till now. What do you think on longer terms? What will other problems that international students will face while they're starting their own companies?
I'm not sure about the latter part. I think in terms of renewable energy, it would be really nice if you could invent a solution that brought the economic cost of things for renewables below that of coal. Right? If you did that, you change the world. If you can't do that, which is obviously an impossibly hard goal, the rate of improvement in solar photovoltaic and wind is so strong now that as an entrepreneur, just in Egypt, for example, since you're Egyptian, start working on solar in Egypt. There's lots of sunshine there. And there are just huge opportunities for the global deployment of these technologies. The compound benefit is very quick. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. So what are some of the unique challenges you see millennials as facing in the tech and innovation landscape within the next couple of years?
Are you a millennial?
I am a millennial.
Okay. I only see opportunities. Yeah. You're smarter. You work as hard or harder. You're smarter. You're better educated, and you've grown up digitally, right? So you have a huge benefit over the older people who didn't have that benefit. And you have one more benefit, which is that you have an enormous amount of energy, and you need to move really fast.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi. Good evening. I have a question. So you're mentioning data scientists. So I was wondering what kind of quality you are looking for data scientists when Google hiring
Really,
people.
really smart ones.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess I would put it a couple ways.
Well, let him ask his question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I interrupted him, now you're
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
basically, inside statistics and people who work between statistics and machine learning, there are a lot of people who are really, really smart, and also they are paying attention to not only extracting structure of the data accurately, but also fast. Basically, they want to do in parallel, but they don't have the opportunity to face real big data because obviously Google have a lot of resources, but not in academic world. So I was wondering, will Google provide more opportunity for these people?
I'm not worried about it. I understand the question you're asking. I'm not worried about the distinction. Data science as a field is exploding in the last 5 years. And the reason is because there's so much data out there. And so the simplest thing that you can do is just figure out a way to do interesting inferencing using new algorithms in data science, which are derived from statistics, but they're essentially mathematical. With respect to the surfacing and the operation of the data sets and the parallelism, there's plenty of computer scientists who can make those things very, very fast.
Yes.
I am personally funding a program at a different university to try to generate more and more of these kinds of people. There's a huge worldwide shortage, and these people are incredibly valuable in every field, in government, in policy, and in everything we could do.
So
Thank you.
In closing, a couple things. One is, for those of you who want more Google, in April we'll have Laszlo Bock, the head of people operations at Google, talking about people analytics at our conference.
And he will be even better than us.
That remains to be seen.
Smarter, but not as funny.
He's very, very good. And Adam, you worked with him for a long time, and I encourage you all. He's going to talk about his new book, which is about how to manage and hire people at an exceptional level.
Work rules. And then finally, I'd really love to thank both Eric and Jonathan for giving us their time and also taking all your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.